My mother had been dead for 11 hours when my sister took the backdoor key out of my purse and called it practical. The coffee was still brewing. A foil pan of funeral potatoes sweated on the counter beside a bundt cake somebody from church had dropped off before sunrise, and the house smelled like scorched grounds, cold lilies, and the faint medicinal sweetness that had settled into the walls over the last 6 months. I was standing at the sink rinsing out my mother's favorite mug because I could not yet bear to see the lipstick stain drying on the rim. Rachel crossed behind me, light-handed and efficient the way people move in houses they think belong to them. "You don't want to keep losing this," she said. I turned. She was holding up the brass key by its round head, the one my mother had kept on a faded blue ribbon for years because the lock at the back door stuck in damp weather. Rachel gave it a little shake, almost smiling as if she had found something I'd carelessly left in the grocery store parking lot instead of in my own purse. "I wasn't losing it," I said. "I know." She opened the junk drawer beside the refrigerator and laid the key inside next to rubber bands, dead batteries, and a church fish fry flyer from Lent. "I just think we should keep practical things where people can find them." People, not me. People. I dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle and looked at the drawer a second too long. It was such a small thing that if I named the sting in it out loud, I would sound exactly the way Rachel had always been able to make me sound: thin-skinned, difficult, emotional, in inconvenient places. The coffee maker hissed and clicked off. Out on the street, a car door slammed. Somebody else coming with food, flowers, or advice. My mother, Evelyn Mercer, had lived in that yellow brick ranch on Linden Street outside Dayton for 32 years. Long enough for the silver maple in the front yard to split the sidewalk in one square place near the curb. Long enough for the kitchen linoleum to curl at one seam by the pantry. Long enough that every cabinet door had its own sound. I knew them all. The sugar drawer stuck in humid weather. The right burner ran hot. If you leaned too hard on the back screen door, it groaned before it opened. For the last year, I'd known the house in a different way, too. I knew which floorboards creaked loud enough to wake my mother when she'd finally fallen asleep near dawn. I knew how long her tea had to steep before the metallic taste in her mouth from the medication didn't ruin it. I knew the exact angle to hold her left elbow when she got dizzy in the hallway. None of that had ever impressed Rachel. She was 6 years older than me, married, polished, and one of those women who could speak to a funeral director in the same tone she used with a dental hygienist or a realtor. Calm, pleasant, competent. She lived in Oakwood with a husband who sold commercial insurance and 2 boys with clean haircuts and matching soccer bags. I lived 10 minutes away in a 1-bedroom apartment I gave up in March when my mother started falling at night and pretending she hadn't. At first it had been temporary, just until we got her blood pressure straightened out, just until she stopped mixing up the pill organizer, just until we figured out why she kept standing in the hall at 2 in the morning like she was waiting for a bus that never came. Temporary lasted through spring, then summer, then the week in August when hospice first came, and my mother looked at me from the recliner and said with a kind of dry embarrassment that hurt more than tears would have, "Well, this is a humiliating way to go." I made oatmeal every morning after that because it was one of the few things she would still eat without fighting me. I learned how to tuck a disposable pad under a fitted sheet without making it bunch beneath her hips. I learned that the kindest thing you could do for someone was often the least dignified-looking thing in the room. Rachel came on Sundays with grocery bags from Dorothy Lane Market and lip gloss still neat on her mouth. She kissed our mother's cheek-opened windows that I had shut because drafts made Mom's joints ache and talked about fresh air like she had invented it. Now she was standing in the kitchen in black slacks and a cream sweater, arranging paper plates and plastic forks, the way she arranged everything with a confidence that made other people relax and made me feel suddenly and stupidly like a guest. "Did you call Pastor Greenback?" she asked. "I left him a message at 7. She nodded, then reached past me for the basket of artificial sweetener packets my mother hadn't used in months. "Okay, I'll handle it if he calls while you're upstairs." I stared at her. "I can answer the phone. Lena." Her voice softened a fraction. "That was always worse. I know you can. I'm just saying you've had the brunt of this." The brunt of this, as if my mother had been weather. As if the last year had simply passed over the house and I'd happened to stand in the open. The doorbell rang before I could answer. Rachel put on the face she used for other people concerned but composed and went to get it. I heard Mrs. Barlow from across the street come in carrying a Pyrex dish wrapped in a striped towel. "Oh, sweetheart," Mrs. Barlow said, and I could not tell at first whether she meant me or Rachel. When I stepped into the living room, my mother's recliner was still angled toward the television, with the afghan folded across the arm and her reading glasses on the side table beside the remote. Rachel had already moved the basket of adult briefs into the hall closet and taken the plastic medication chart off the lamp table. The room looked better. Less true, but better. Mrs. Barlow pressed my arm. "You did so much for her, honey. It should have felt kind." Instead, it landed with the strange smallness of a tip left on a table after a hard shift. Rachel was telling her where to set the potatoes. "We're doing visitation tomorrow evening at Holloway's," she said. "And then the service Friday morning. I think simple is best." I think. I stood there in my mother's living room with my sleep shirt under a cardigan and the indent from my ponytail still aching at the back of my scalp, and for one ugly second I wanted to say, "You don't know where the funeral blouse is. You don't know which earrings she wanted buried with her because you weren't here when she still talked about those things. You don't know she hated lilies because they smelled like hospitals." But Rachel turned to me with that same smoothing expression. "Isn't that right, Lena?" Mrs. Barlow looked at me expectantly. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. By 10:30, the kitchen table was covered in condolence cards, paper napkins and Tupperware with masking tape names on the lids. Aunt Donna came in from the garage carrying a case of Diet Coke and a bag of ice, set both down with a grunt, then looked at me long enough to see more than I wanted anyone seeing. "You eat anything?" she asked. I had toast. "That's not food." Rachel laughed lightly from the counter where she was making a neat stack of church bulletins someone had dropped off. "She's been running on fumes for weeks. I keep telling her she has to let other people step in now." Aunt Donna's eyes shifted to me, then to Rachel, then back again. She said in the tone she used when she knew better than to argue in front of company. The phone rang just then, the old wall phone near the pantry that my mother refused to replace with anything cordless because if it works, why throw money at it? I wiped my hand on my jeans and reached for it. Rachel was closer. She got there first. "Holloway Funeral Home." "Yes," she said after listening a beat. "This is Rachel Dalton, Evelyn Mercer's daughter." Not daughter. The daughter. I stood 2 feet away while she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and listened with professional sympathy on her face. Then she covered the receiver and looked at me with a little crease between her brows, one designed to read as concern to anyone watching. "They're asking about the clothing for tomorrow and whether there are any house-related papers that need to be gathered before the service," she said. "I'll take care of it." I held out my hand. "It's Mom's visitation, and I'm handling it." Something in my chest went hard and cold. Aunt Donna was quiet at the table. Mrs. Barlow pretended to be very interested in peeling the plastic back from a tray of deviled eggs. The whole room had that awful polite stillness families get when everybody knows a line has been crossed, but nobody wants to be the one to say so before the casseroles are even in the oven. Rachel turned slightly away from me and went back into her call voice. "Yes," she said. "After the service, we'll need to discuss what makes sense for the house." There was a pause. Then, clear enough that even from where I stood, I could hear the assumption in it, the woman on the other end said something that made Rachel glance at me once and then answer smooth as cream poured into coffee. "Yes, I'm the one handling those decisions." Rachel kept the receiver to her ear, another few seconds nodding at nothing, then said she would bring whatever Holloway's needed in the morning. When she hung up, nobody looked directly at me. That was the part I hated most. Not open disagreement, not even pity. Just the small practiced mercy of people deciding to behave as though nothing awkward had happened in front of the cold cuts and sheet cake. "I'll go get Mom's navy dress," I said. Rachel was already gathering her purse and legal pad off the counter. "I know which one." I looked at her. "No, you don't." She gave me a patient smile like I had corrected the weather. "Lena." "She hated the navy one," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. It pinched under her arms after she lost weight. Mrs. Barlow blinked. Aunt Donna stopped peeling tape off a casserole lid. Rachel's expression changed only by a degree, but I knew it well. It was the face she made when she was about to smooth me out in front of witnesses. "Okay," she said gently. "Then show me," as if I needed permission in my own mother's house. I went down the hall without answering. Rachel followed after a second, not close enough to look confrontational, just close enough to keep me from having a private moment in the one room left that still smelled like my mother's hand cream and menthol rub. The bedroom was too neat. I had made the bed that morning because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Her glasses were still folded on the Bible by the lamp. The tissues in the box on her nightstand had the top one pulled halfway out, the way she always left them. I opened the closet and reached for the black dress with the small pearl buttons down the sleeves. Rachel leaned against the doorframe. "That one, that's the one she asked for. She never told me that." I slid the dress off the hanger and kept my back to her. "I know." There was silence behind me. Then she said with that maddening softness, "You don't have to make this into a test." I turned then. "I'm not making it into anything." Her face held. "You've been under a lot of pressure. I get that." I almost laughed. It would have come out ugly, so I swallowed it. That sentence had followed me for the last year in different clothes. When I was 23 and dropped out of community college for a semester because Mom's first bad spell had scared me more than I admitted, Rachel told people I was overwhelmed. When I moved back into the house in March, she told relatives it was probably for the best because I'd been drifting anyway. Even when she was being kind, she had a way of making my life sound like a hallway people passed through on the way to a real room. I held the dress tighter than I needed to. I know what she wanted. Rachel looked past me into the closet. "Then where are her pearl earrings?" I didn't answer right away because I knew exactly where they were. Top drawer of the vanity, back left corner inside the old green ring box she had kept after losing the ring years ago. But I also knew what Rachel was doing. Not asking, measuring, looking for one visible place where I might fail in front of her. "In the vanity," I said. "Which drawer?" I stared at her. She gave a little sigh as though I was proving something tiresome. Then she stepped around me, crossed to the vanity, and pulled open the top drawer. She moved a brush, 2 tubes of lipstick, a packet of cough drops, then froze. The ring box sat exactly where I knew it would. She opened it. The pearls were inside. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired enough that even being right barely warmed me. Rachel closed the box. Fine, as if the issue had been earrings. We took the dress and jewelry to the kitchen where the room had filled with more people from church, 2 of my mother's car club friends, and Mr. Ellis from next door, who kept saying "your poor mama" like he had just invented grief that morning. By noon, the counters were lined with aluminum pans and store-bought cookie trays. Someone had brought a ham. Someone else had brought 3 bags of King's Hawaiian rolls. The whole house had turned into one of those American morning scenes where people feed you because they cannot bear the uselessness of standing empty-handed near pain. Rachel moved through it like she had rehearsed. She put people to work, thanked them by name, told one of the women from church where the extra folding chairs were kept, and stood in the middle of the kitchen like a daughter in a brochure about family strength. And because I had lived inside my mother's actual dying, I knew exactly how much of that was performance, not false exactly. Rachel loved our mother in the way she knew how. But loving someone at a distance and carrying them up from the toilet at 3 in the morning were not the same thing, and I was beginning to understand that if I didn't name that distinction somewhere in myself, Rachel was going to erase it completely. The first real crack came just after 1 when Pastor Green arrived to go over the order of service. We sat around the kitchen table with legal pads, sympathy cards, and a plate of untouched sugar cookies between us. Pastor Green asked about scripture. Rachel said Mom had always loved the 23rd Psalm. She did, I said. But she wanted Isaiah too, the one about being held by the right hand. Rachel glanced at me with a quick smile. I think she mentioned that once. She had not. My mother had told me that line on a Thursday night in July when I was helping her change into a clean gown after she'd gotten sick in bed and cried from shame more than weakness. I'd been kneeling on the floor tying up the trash bag with the ruined sheets inside when she said, "Read me that one about not being afraid." The hand one. I had read it to her from the Bible on the nightstand while the room still smelled like bleach and old sweat and dignity, trying not to die. Pastor Green nodded. That's a lovely choice. Then he asked whether Evelyn had wanted open casket or closed. Rachel answered before I could breathe, "Closed." She wouldn't want people seeing her diminished. She said, "Open," I said. Rachel looked at me. "Lena, no." She said if they were coming to say goodbye, then they could say goodbye to all of it. Pastor Green's eyes shifted between us. His face stayed kind, but I saw it happen. That tiny recalculation people do when one sister sounds orderly and one sounds too attached. Rachel touched his arm lightly. The last months were very hard on Lena. She was here for everything. Said like a reason I should not be trusted. I sat very still because years ago I had learned that if I reacted in the first 10 seconds, I lost. At 14, when Rachel told our aunt I was being dramatic because I cried after Mom missed my choir concert, I had shouted so hard my voice cracked and spent the next week apologizing for my tone instead of anyone asking why I'd been hurt. At 19, when Rachel laughed that I was playing martyr for driving Mom to physical therapy every Tuesday, I snapped back in front of cousins at Thanksgiving and became once again the difficult one. So I had learned silence the way other people learn prayer. Repetition first, faith later. But silence was starting to cost more than it saved. Pastor Green cleared his throat. Perhaps the funeral director can advise. Rachel nodded as though that settled things. I stared at the plate of sugar cookies until the white icing blurred. After he left, Aunt Donna found me by the pantry pretending to organize paper goods. She did ask for open, Aunt Donna said quietly. I looked up. Donna shrugged one shoulder, told me 2 weeks ago she didn't want people remembering only the old version, said, "This is what dying does. Let them look at it if they love me." Something sharp and hot moved through my throat. Why didn't you say that at the table? Her mouth tightened. Because your sister likes a room. You need more than me if you want to stop her. Not because Donna doubted me, because she knew what I was up against. At 3 that afternoon, while Rachel was in the living room with Mrs. Barlow going over flower cards, the phone rang again. This time I got to it first. Lena Mercer, a man asked. Yes, this is Thomas Avery, your mother's attorney. I'm sorry for your loss. I gripped the receiver harder. Thank you. I understand the visitation is tomorrow evening. I had hoped to speak with both daughters together before then, but given the timing, I need to make sure there's no confusion regarding the house. My stomach went hollow. What kind of confusion? A brief pause. Paper shifting on his end. Your mother executed and recorded a revised deed 6 weeks ago, he said. I assumed Rachel was aware, but from the message I received this morning, I gather that may not be the case. For a second, all I could hear was the refrigerator humming behind me and someone in the living room laughing too loudly at something polite. I don't understand, I said. It means, he said carefully, that title to the property was transferred before your mother's death. My knees almost went. Transferred. Before her death. Not probate. Not later. Not after everyone had performed grief and arranged flowers and decided which daughter looked steadier in black. I put a hand flat against the pantry door to hold myself up. Behind it, I knew without opening it, my handwritten medication chart was still taped to the inside panel, where I'd left it for night checks. 8 a.m. blood pressure pill, noon anti-nausea, 6 p.m. comfort dose if needed, tiny, ugly, practical things, the whole hidden architecture of the life Rachel was narrating from outside, to who I whispered. Mr. Avery was silent, just long enough to make the answer feel heavier. Ms. Mercer, he said, I think this conversation needs to happen with a witness present. Marianne Cole from hospice attended the final meeting at your mother's request. She can confirm capacity and intention. Your mother was very clear. Clear. The word hit me harder than transferred had. Because the house was one thing. Houses were wood and debt and keys and furnace filters and taxes due in January. But clear meant something else. It meant my mother had not drifted into that decision through confusion. It meant she had seen something. Chosen something. In the living room, I heard Rachel's voice moving closer, warm and smooth. Who is it? I looked toward the doorway as her shadow crossed the hall. Mr. Avery said I'm available to come by this evening. Miss Cole is with me. We felt it best to address this before assumptions harden. Rachel stepped into view just as I said, come. She looked at my face, and for the first time all day, something in hers changed. Not grief, not concern. Alarm. An hour later, Marianne Cole stood in my mother's kitchen with her hands folded lightly at her waist. Her hospice badge clipped to a navy cardigan, while Rachel kept one arm wrapped around herself as if she were cold. Mr. Avery had the folder in his hand. Aunt Donna sat at the table without taking off her coat. Mrs. Barlow had finally gone home. The house felt smaller, quieter, like it had drawn itself in to listen. Rachel recovered first. Of course she did. There must be some misunderstanding, she said with a strained little laugh. Mom was on morphine. She was confused half the time by the end. Marianne looked at her steadily. She had sat at the same table 3 times a week for months, taking notes, asking my mother careful questions, watching the room the way people in her job learn to do. No, she said. Your mother was not confused in that meeting. Rachel's face sharpened. You can't possibly know what she was like every day. No, Marianne said. But I know what she was like that day. And Evelyn was very clear about who had been carrying her. Rachel stared at her. Then she said, quiet and cutting and truer than anything else she'd said all day. Carrying her isn't the same as being meant for more. I looked at Rachel for a long second after she said it. Carrying her isn't the same as being meant for more. The room went so still I could hear the old refrigerator kick on behind me. Marianne's face did not change, but Aunt Donna let out one sharp breath through her nose, the kind people make when something ugly has finally stopped pretending to be decent. Rachel must have heard herself too late because her expression tightened almost immediately. That's not what I meant, she said, and now there was color high in her cheeks. I'm saying Lena has always been close to things. Attached. Mom worried about that. Mr. Avery opened the folder in his hand with a measured kind of patience. Your mother was specific, Miss Dalton. Rachel looked at him like she could still bend the room back if she found the right tone. Specific about what exactly? He drew out a copy of the deed and laid it on the kitchen table between the condolence cards and the tray of untouched sugar cookies. About the transfer, he said, and about her reasons for wanting it recorded before her death. I had not sat down, but suddenly I needed the back of the chair under my hand. The paper on the table looked too plain for what it was. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a county form with names and a date and a seal. The kind of document people shuffled into file cabinets every day, except this one seemed to split the room in half. Rachel stared at it. You let a dying woman sign away her house 6 weeks before the funeral. Mr. Avery did not flinch. I allowed a competent client to make a lawful decision after confirming capacity and intent. Marianne spoke then, calm as rain. Your mother requested that I stay because she did not want anyone later saying she was confused. At that, something turned over hard inside me. That sounded like my mother. Not sentimental, not dramatic, just practical enough to anticipate insult before it arrived. Rachel gave a strained laugh. Of course she said that. Lena was in her ear every day. I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me, waiting for the old version of me to show up. The crying one, the defensive one, the one who would speak too fast and turn her own pain into proof against herself. For a second I felt her there, that version of me right under my skin. Then I thought of my mother in July, weak and embarrassed and trying to hold on to something of herself while I changed the bed under her. I thought of the way Rachel had stood in this same kitchen and called herself practical, while moving evidence of dying into closets. I thought of all the times I'd stayed silent because I was tired and wanted peace more than truth, and I understood with a clarity that scared me a little that peace had never actually been what silence bought me. It had bought Rachel room. I pulled out the chair and sat down at the table. Rachel blinked at me, maybe because it was the first time all day I had done something that did not look like retreat. You want to know what she was specific about? I asked. My voice sounded low and steady. Not brave, just done. Rachel folded her arms. Go ahead. She was specific about which nights she panicked if the hallway light was off, I said. She was specific about which pills made her nauseated if she took them on an empty stomach. She was specific about not wanting lilies in the house because they smelled like the oncology floor. She was specific about wanting the black dress because the navy one pinched under her arms after she lost weight. She was specific about open casket because she said if people loved her, they could look at what dying did. Rachel's mouth tightened. I kept going. She was specific every day. You just weren't here for those kinds of specifics. No one moved. Aunt Donna's hand stayed wrapped around her purse strap. Mr. Avery looked down at the deed as if giving me the dignity of not interrupting. Marianne watched Rachel. Rachel looked at me with a kind of disbelief I'd waited my whole life to earn. That doesn't mean she wanted you owning the house. No, I said. It means she knew who had been living in it with her. That landed harder than I expected. Not because it was sharp, but because it was true enough to quiet even me. Rachel shook her head slowly, recovering inch by inch. You always do this. You take hardship and turn it into sainthood. I almost smiled then because there it was again. The family rule spoken plain at last. If I suffered quietly, it counted for nothing. If I named it, I was performing it. Do I asked. Or do you just need that to be true, Lena? No. I leaned forward just enough to feel the table edge against my ribs. You don't get to smooth me down this time. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Something in the room had already shifted. You could feel it. Even Rachel could feel it. That was why her hands were no longer still. Aunt Donna spoke into the silence. Evelyn told me herself she wanted open casket 2 weeks ago. Rachel turned toward her, almost wounded. And you didn't say anything. Donna's face hardened. I'm saying it now. That was the thing about family stories. They could hold for years until one person finally stopped cooperating, and then suddenly everybody remembered pieces of the truth they had left lying around for convenience. Rachel looked back at me. I could see her trying to decide whether anger or grace would serve her better. Grace had always won before. I came when I could, she said, and for the first time there was a crack in her voice. I have children. I have a husband. I have a life. The old shame stirred in me automatically. The old reflex to make room for that sentence, to apologize for being the one whose life had become small enough to fit inside an illness. But that was exactly the lie. My life had not become small. It had become hard. Those were not the same thing. I know you have a life, I said. That's the point, her eyes flashed. So because you stayed here, you get everything? No. I looked at the deed, then back at her. Because I stayed here, I know what everything actually was. The room held. You got to come over and look like a daughter, I said. I had to be one. Rachel's face changed then, not into guilt exactly and not into rage, more like exposure, like she had stepped outside without realizing how much light there was. For one raw second I thought she might say something honest, something about how frightening our mother had become to her when her body stopped obeying itself, something about how she had not known what to do with helplessness and had mistaken distance for order, something that could have made the room hurt differently. Instead, she said, "Mom always worried you'd never make a real life if you stayed too close to her." The sentence hit low and mean because it carried enough old truth to hurt. My mother had worried about me. She had said versions of that before things got bad. She had wanted more for me than part-time work and a cot sleep in the room next to hers. Rachel had chosen the one blade still sharp enough to use. I felt it go in, and then almost as quickly I felt something else rise up behind it. "She did worry about that," I said. My throat burned, but my voice stayed even, and she still changed the deed. Rachel stared at me. "That's what you can't stand," I said. Not that she loved me more, not that she loved you less, that she knew exactly what this cost and she decided the house should answer to the truth instead of the performance. For the first time since she arrived, Rachel had no expression ready. Mr. Avery closed the folder. The small sound of it felt final. "There will be time later for practical matters," he said. "But as of now, ownership is not in dispute, not in dispute." Simple words, heavy enough to settle a whole room. Rachel looked at Marianne, then at Aunt Donna, then finally at me. I watched her understand piece by piece that the old machinery had failed her. The concerned voice, the competence, the gentle correction, the use of my own exhaustion against me. None of it could get her past a dead woman's final clarity. She picked up her coat from the chair back. "I think I should go," she said. No one stopped her. At the funeral the next morning, my mother lay in the black dress with the pearl buttons and the earrings from the green ring box. Her hands were folded over the Bible from her nightstand. People came forward in slow lines, some crying openly, some touching the casket edge with 2 fingers like they were checking whether grief was solid. More than one person said she looked peaceful, which I thought was a strange word for a face that had spent a year fighting to stay itself. Rachel stood on the other side of the receiving line in a dark coat, beautiful and controlled and unreadable. We did not speak, except when necessity forced it. When the burial was over and people started climbing back into cars under the gray Ohio sky, Aunt Donna squeezed my shoulder once and said, "Go on home before the crowd gets there." Home. No one had called it that in front of me for a long time. By the time I got back to Linden Street, the first mourners were already arriving with foil pans and paper bags. I parked at the curb and walked around to the back instead of using the front door. The yard was damp from morning rain. The flower pot by the steps still held the dead mums from fall, brittle and brown around the edges. I reached into my coat pocket and found the brass key. I had taken it back from the junk drawer before leaving for the church without ceremony, without asking. The lock stuck the way it always did when the weather turned. I had to lift the handle a little before it gave. Then I stepped inside. The kitchen was dim and cool and smelled faintly of coffee from yesterday. Somewhere in the front of the house I could hear voices beginning to gather, low and respectful. I stood very still with the door shut behind me, one hand still on the knob, and let the quiet settle over my shoulders. Then I crossed to the pantry and opened the door. My handwritten notes were still taped to the inside panel in blue painter's tape. Blood pressure, nausea, comfort dose, extra blanket if chilled, call Marianne if breathing changes after midnight. My own printing, cramped and practical and unlovely, the kind of writing that never expected an audience. I touched the edge of the paper with 2 fingers. Outside, car doors opened and closed. Someone laughed softly and then caught themselves. Life already trying to move with grief tucked under one arm. I stood there in my black coat in my mother's kitchen, looking at the record of what love had actually looked like in this house when no one was dressed for it. And for the first time since she died, the silence did not feel like abandonment. It felt like being answered.